Rian Johnson's Knives Out is the peak whodunit. I saw Knives Out 14 times at the cinema, and I don't know why it was playing for a good 4 months in my area, but when the universe presents you with a gift, you take it. 14 times. Hi everyone, it's LadyJenevia. This video has been a long time coming. I've been dropping hints for a while now that eventually I was going to make a video about Knives Out. I'm assuming if you've clicked on this video, you are already familiar with the film, but on the offhand chance that you are not, I want to say before we get started that Knives Out is a Rian Johnson whodunit, and if you have not already seen it, I strongly recommend that you do so before watching this video, because among other things, I will be talking about who did it. And once you know who did it, you can never experience the full magic, as it was originally intended, of going on the journey that takes you to the answer to that question of who killed Harlan Thrombey. Now, without further ado, let's talk about Rian Johnson's Knives Out. When we think of whodunit stories, many of the classics that get referenced are European period pieces. From Agatha Christie's Miss Marple and Poirot, to Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes, even many of the modern films and television series that focus on these whodunit detective stories end up being direct or loose adaptations from these period pieces. Rian Johnson's Knives Out is an entirely new, fresh, and vibrant addition to the genre. It's a socially relevant modern story with vibrant characters, a stylish presentation, and a deep understanding of what makes a great whodunit. Today we're going to take a deep dive into the many details of what makes Knives Out so brilliant. Knives Out wastes no time in setting itself apart from the other famed stories in the whodunit genre. As is customary, the audience must meet the victim, Harlan Thrombey, and the eccentric detective that will be working to solve his murder, Benoit Blanc. However, there's also a unique charm and sense of humor that's introduced just as quickly. It's not just the musicality of the way the dialogue flows and transitions from one suspect to the next, the story is also incredibly meta, with numerous references to the whodunit genre sprinkled in without ever becoming overbearing. When Marta's family is introduced, her sister is watching a whodunit featuring a voice cameo by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, who collaborated with Rian Johnson on one of his previous films, Looper.
You slashed his face open, you left him bleeding in the street like a stuck pig, then you crushed his skull with a forklift and burned his hands off to erase the fingerprints.
Marta's mother is also later shown to be watching a Spanish-dubbed version of the long-lasting whodunit series Murder, She Wrote. Benoit Blanc references Sherlock Holmes when bringing Marta on as his second on the case.
How about it, Watson? The game is afoot. Hey, Watson?
And of course, Rian Johnson had to include multiple references to the Lifetime original, Deadly by Surprise.
There's this Hallmark movie called Deadly by Surprise with Danica McKellar, and in it she plays his wife.
The Hallmark movie she told me about with Danica McKellar.
Deadly by Surprise.
Trooper Wagner and Detective Elliot are the local law enforcement tasked with investigating Harlan Thrombey's death, and in another world, they would be the type of dynamic duo to star in their own buddy cop series, particularly once you hear this bit of banter.
Sure. Watch your head. Thank you.
Hey, you don't need to thank.
Lakeith Stanfield has the underrated challenge of giving one of the most grounded performances in a sea of highly eccentric characters. He's also treated to a delightfully self-aware joke for those that remember him from another famous hit.
Get out!
Trooper Wagner is one of the more relatable characters of this ensemble for how full of enthusiasm he is about murder mysteries. For one, he's a fan of Harlan Thrombey's work.
Okay, like Thousand Knives, the cow and the shotgun. Like, where do you come up with that? You know all these statues that you see around here? They're all straight out of his series, the Menagerie Tragedy trilogy. It's the trick window from A Kill for All Seasons.
He also serves up one of the funniest moments in the film.
Benny, look, I hear what you're saying, but just...
In that moment, we are all Trooper Wagner, gleefully enthralled by Benoit Blanc's big dramatic monologue that will reveal the truth of the who, how, and why of Harlan Thrombey's death. Not even Marta upchucking can diminish his excitement when he realizes the deeper implications.
That means she's lying!
There's also the obvious matter of the victim, Harlan Thrombey, being a professional murder mystery writer, which doesn't only exist to further the film's place as a giant love letter to the whodunit genre. It's brilliantly incorporated into the fabric of how the story's events unfold. Very early on, when the audience is introduced to the pool of suspects, we also learn a key piece of information about Harlan.
Well, Dad said the plots just popped into his head, fully formed. It was the easy part for him.
This is essential to what happens in the lead up to his death. When he has the realization that he only has minutes to live, or at least he thinks he does since no one knows yet that the contents of the vials were switched, he is able to relay an entire course of action for Marta to take to try to cover her tracks. This also speaks to the depth of their relationship, that he cares about ensuring that she and her family don't suffer the devastating consequences of a tragic accident, even if that accident results in his own death.
We have got to get you out of this. Think of your mom.
This also sets a precedent for how tightly woven this script is. There are so many details that are presented throughout the film that make the big revelations that come later on have meaning. One of the biggest sins you can do in a whodunit is to not give the audience the information they and the main detectives need to reach the truth. It doesn't mean that the ending should be obvious, but the clues have to be there so the audience can know that the big reveal is warranted. This is the part where I will give what may seem like an excessive number of examples, but it's entirely necessary for me to list several in order to drive the point home of how tight Rian Johnson kept this script. When Marta arrives at the Thrombey Manor and Meg comes over to her, Meg is vaping on a jewel pen. This is not an inconsequential detail or just a way to make her seem more #relatable to the young people watching. Her vaping connects to the later scene when Fran mentions that she hasn't been going into her stash because Meg gifted her with her own jewel. This ensures that with these three people being the only ones to know about this hiding spot, no one has any reason to prioritize going into it until Marta recalls the existence of this stash and determines that Fran was trying to tell her where to find the copy of the toxicology report.
Take them whenever you need them. They're just drying out since she gave me that jewel.
That's where Frank keeps her stuff?
When Marta goes to spy on Benoit Blanc, Detective Elliot, and Trooper Wagner, she is quickly discovered through a hole in the stained glass window that was specially designed solely for this gag to be executed.
This gag here with the stained glass, this is something the art department printed, and David Crank, our production designer, found this and made the window in it specifically so we could do that gag with the eye coming into frame. That was all planned.
She goes outside at the request of Benoit Blanc, who intends to ask her questions, since he has only questioned Harlan's immediate family thus far, and the first thing he does is look down and spot the bloodstain on her shoe. It's not a passing glance either, he gives it a proper once-over, but you don't realize the significance of what he's done until after you've watched the film all the way through and decided to rewatch it because you had so much fun watching it the first time that you just need to do it again.
When did you know I had something to do with Harlan's death?
Oh, from the first moment you set foot in front of me. I've been doing a little poking.
When Richard is first introduced, one of the first things he does is say that Ransom missed the funeral.
He's not coming. Ransom, little shit. Missed the funeral.
This becomes more important later on, particularly when we fast forward to the will reading.
Funny, Ransom, you skipped the funeral, but you're early for the will reading.
Ransom's arrival into the story quickly spirals into an argument between him and the other members of his family. It's revealed to all of them that Ransom and Harlan had a fight at his birthday, in which Ransom learned that he was getting cut out of the will, as were the other members of the family. However, they get so caught up in their own dramatics that they never question why he bothered to show up to the will reading if he already knew he wouldn't be getting a single red dime.
Like Dad liked to say, a single red dime? You're nuts!
You can't be serious. Not a red dime or word of my work to a single one of them, you included.
Of course, it's later revealed by Benoit Blanc that Ransom and Harlan were, as he called it, drama mamas.
Drama mamas.
But even that was information that had been presented to us earlier on in the story.
They have this love-hate bond. They fight.
Benoit asks Marta to help him with the case as he investigates the grounds for clues. Upon discovering the hidden window that can be used to sneak into the house, there is mud discovered on the windowsill. Back when Marta's recollection of the night Harlan died played out, she climbed through that trick window, but her foot never touched the windowsill when she climbed through. The film begins by presenting the audience with a killer that we are meant to root for. We want her to get away with it.
10 years ago when I had the first idea for this movie, this was basically what the idea was. What if you started a movie as a traditional whodunit, which is what we've done up to this point, and had the questioning and set up the suspects, and then you did the Columbo thing. You know, they show you who did it at the beginning of the episode, and then it's tension. It's a how did it? It's seeing how Columbo is going to catch them, basically, is the tension of it. And that is a stronger narrative engine than just clue gathering and asking who done it, because it's suspense. You're actually leaning forward saying, how is this going to happen? So the idea of, could we do this scene and reveal to the audience who did it, but do it in such a way where the quote-unquote killer is the person who you're actually sympathetic to, and not just in a creepy, oh, I feel weird, I'm rooting for the killer like Hitchcock way, but actually the killer is the one who the moral compass of the movie will only be aligned if they get away with it.
However, this lack of mud transference is one of the noteworthy clues early on that someone else had come through that window. Another clue is the dogs. I'll be revisiting the dogs more than once throughout this video, but for now, as it applies to this point of discussion, when the preliminary facts are gone through about what happened that night, one point that's mentioned is that Meg was woken up by the dogs barking. However, we see later on in the film that the dogs don't bark at Marta. The dogs bark at Ransom. They added barks in post when they are running up to see Linda because they didn't want the barking to be too obvious a giveaway, but for me personally as a viewer, I never interpreted their barks towards Linda as a reason to be suspicious of her. I just assumed they were excited to see her, particularly since you see one of them sitting comfortably with her later on. Additionally, there is the matter of Great Nana Thromby saying, "Ransom, are you back again already?" But this particular point of evidence isn't as applicable to this discussion because this cannot be a clue that the audience uses to reach the conclusion, because she isn't revealed to be as properly cognizant until Benoit Blanc's big monologue at the end. Before that point, people are operating under the theory that she's not quite there mentally, partially because of how old she is, and also because of her general demeanor.
Do you want dinner, Nana? Dinner? To eat? To eat?
When Marta receives the copy of the toxicology report, the bottom of the paper is torn, because Ransom tore off the original meeting time and location. It might not be a massive clue to the audience on its own, but it is peculiar enough to warrant suspicion, as is the deliberately missing glass bottle at Ransom's house in the background, since this is what he used to burn down the coroner's office, though you wouldn't know to look closely at it since it's in the background. And at this point in the film, you don't know yet that it's been burned down. However, the film is planting that for the audience's benefit, because if it wasn't meant to be noticed at all, they would have simply arranged them without a gap in the row. I already mentioned Fran's reference of Danica McKellar's Deadly by Surprise, but what's also worth noting in that scene is that this is when she says she has a cousin that works at the medical examiner's office.
And my cousin, who's a receptionist at the medical examiner's office, she says that stuff totally happens.
Though Marta only appears to be partially paying attention, she recalls it later on as the Watson to Benoit Blanc's Sherlock, when despite all his brilliance in piecing everything together, she is the one that's able to fill one of the only gaps he could not figure out on his own.
Because she has a cousin. She told me she has a cousin who works as a receptionist at the examiner's office.
Well, voila!
I see no reason to have to choose between style or substance. I've never believed that the two are mutually exclusive facets of art, especially when it comes to filmmaking. Some of my favorite directors in filmmaking are ones that know how to serve up a visual spectacle while also telling a compelling story. Knives Out is a feast for the eyes in so many ways. The phrase "beauty lies in the details" is absolutely applicable here. Though many people have memed Chris Evans' cable knit sweater, I find that to be a ridiculous choice to hone in on when praising the film's fashion, when Linda is right there in her bold, vibrant colors and exquisite suits. Also, there's another hilariously iconic costume that I somehow managed to miss noticing until very recently. Look at Meg's shirt here. Look at it closely. Do you see what I see? Honestly, the way they slipped this in without getting dinged by the censors, truly iconic. The sets for the various rooms in Harlan's house are gorgeous. There's a meticulous attention to detail in the trinkets you see all over the place that give the house so much life and character.
This little room was beautiful. I love dollying past that spanking statue. A little subtext of the scene. David Schlesinger was our set decorator, and he's the one who found everything you see in this room. Pretty much everything. All of the crazy stuff, all of the set dressing, basically. That was David, and he was amazing. He scoured Massachusetts and beyond for all of these crazy trinkets, and the reason the set has the feeling of richness and detail that it does, that's all down to David Schlesinger.
Even the stained glass windows have skeletons that are fitting of the whodunit genre, and the fact that Harlan is a mystery writer suggests that he must have hired an interior decorator to make the house match his tastes. There are recurring shots of a painting of Harlan in which he looks waspy and judgmental, but at the end, when Marta looks at him for the last time, he has a warm, paternal smile that seems to say that he's proud of her for winning while staying a good person. The Wheel of Knives is another brilliant piece of craftsmanship. I feel so sad for Rian Johnson since he really wanted to keep it, but multiple knives that were used in it were rented, so they had to be returned after the film wrapped. Of course, there are obvious plot reasons for this prop to exist, and some symbolism to read into as well, but on a purely stylistic level, it's very pretty to look at, and even if it only existed to set up this shot of Daniel Craig sitting in front of it, I would have still loved it. There are so many shots that I love to point out and praise since there's a lot of gorgeous cinematography and creativity in the filmmaking. There's this shot where the camera spins to reveal Richard giddy over being able to witness the disagreement between Walt and Harlan, the spinning coin at the beginning and end of Marta's recollection of what happened between her and Harlan the night that he died, Fran emerging from the shadows when spying on Ransom, the camera moving forward towards Benoit Blanc when the Thrombies are trying to figure out a way to take Harlan's money back from Marta, the camera being switched to handheld when the family swarms Marta outside, the part where Marta is looking at Harlan and Ransom while in the present as a way of transitioning the scene back to the night of Harlan's birthday party. That's by no means all of the aesthetically pleasing parts of Knives Out, but it's certainly enough for me to make my point. Research has shown time and time again that memory can be unreliable. Knives Out is brilliant in its depiction of the subjectivity of human memory through the use of varied perspectives. There are instances where information differs because of that subjectivity in perspective, and other times there is a clear split between what really happened and what people are saying because they are knowingly lying. During the first round of questioning, Richard, Walt, and Joni all lied to cover up the falling outs they each had with Harlan shortly before he died. Richard was having an affair that Harlan was threatening to tell Linda about, Walt had been fired from the publishing company, and Joni got cut off for double dipping into Meg's tuition fund. I have a real soft spot for these variations that come from the subjectivity of human memory because inaccuracies regarding psychology can often take me out of a story. When Linda says that Ransom left the party early, we see him give Great Nana Thromby a slice of cake as he's walking out the door. But when others recall him storming out, she already has the slice of cake. This is a fairly inconsequential detail in the grand scheme of what happened that night, but what it does convey is that Linda loves her son. This is a quicker way of communicating to the audience that despite Ransom's many flaws, Linda loves him and is speaking more favorably of him than the other members of the family. While we're on the matter of cake, another variation is the image of Harlan being surrounded by his loved ones while he's presented with his birthday cake. Everyone is trying to paint a pretty picture of being close to Harlan. None of these people want to air out any disagreements they had with him, partially because it's embarrassing, but also because it would make themselves look guilty even if they're innocent of the crime that's being investigated. Also, Joni dancing around when she recalls the night of the party further individualizes that version of the events to match her character stylistically. Toni Collette even chose the song they used for that scene.
Toni picked that song, that Roxy Music song, by the way. She was like, "Can I dance to this?" And I was like, "Yes." She did it, and then we had to pay to clear the song, and it wasn't cheap, but man, it was worth it.
Call attention to the time,
God, it's midnight already.
if you can.
When Walt recalls to the police that Marta left around midnight, he doesn't say that she was the one who called attention to the time per Harlan's suggestion. It wouldn't have seemed like an important thing to mention to them, and he might not have even remembered that she mentioned it in the first place. That type of detail might have just slipped through the cracks when he was recalling that night. Similarly, when he recalled seeing Harlan coming downstairs, the body language more closely resembles Harlan, even though it was actually Marta pretending to be him, which we see her do later on when the events are shown from her memories. As it turns out, this shot of Marta sneaking down in Walt's memory was something done by a crew member because when they tried to shoot this footage with Anna, it was too obvious.
We actually had to reshoot this several times because it was too clear back there. And I remember initially we had Anna put on the robe and do it. It was impossible for her to not to look like Anna, so I think eventually it wasn't Christopher Plummer, but we had one of the stand-ins who was I think it was Ross, I think it was Daniel Craig's stand-in. We had him put on the robe and come down just so he'd be slightly more lumbering of a form.
When Richard talks about Marta to the investigators, we see this shot of him beckoning her over. He speaks about her like she's part of the family, which is another recurring issue about how the Thrombys treat Marta that definitely warrants further discussion, but we'll get to that later. The point is that we see this shot again later under much different circumstances when he's beckoning her over as a token to try to prove that he's correct in his regressive perspectives about immigration and privilege.
First was when Joni heard a ka-thunk from somewhere above her in the house.
In the events immediately before Harlan's death, we see it play out from both Joni and Marta's perspectives. Joni hears the kerthunk from downstairs, which is why she goes upstairs to check in on them, waking Linda up in the process. In the background, we can see Marta, and her general body language appears calm, cool, and collected. However, when you see this scene played out from Marta's perspective, her body language is much more frantic, though she's trying to conceal it, and the angle of how she's standing is slightly different from how Joni recalled it. Another difference in their perspectives of this scene is the dialogue. When Joni tells the story of the last time she saw Harlan, she leaves out the fact that she brought up the matter of wanting to talk to him again tomorrow, because she wanted to convince him to reconsider rescinding his financial support for Meg's tuition, but you can hear it in the background of Marta's memory. The film is great at bringing to life this concept of there being different versions of the truth from the people who share their perspectives, while the real truth can often lie somewhere in the middle.